I request, before we proceed, I request all the participants to please use the chat and Q&A sections for any of your queries to the speaker. And a warm welcome to all the participants joining us today in this webinar on the message medium by data. And here's the quick introduction of data. Data works at Timely Milwaukee in the area of strategic product innovation. This intersection really combines two of his greatest passions, creativity and personal development. Over the years, Dieter worked on products for tablet education, adaptive learning, museum education, and personalized teaching. More recently, he was involved in setting up new international markets and in the creation of strategic product innovation charter. Dieter's motto is to learn from your mistakes and learn from others. And this is true for innovation and for learning. So over to you, Dieter.
Yeah, thank you, Deepika, for the introduction. Welcome, everybody. As Deepika said, I work at an educational publisher, and I'm here to give you a short presentation on the relationship between education and technology and my experience in that field. The title of the presentation is "The Medium is the Message." That will become clear, I hope, later on during the presentation. First of all, let me just say something about myself. As I said, I work for Timely Milwaukee, which is a standard old-school book publisher for education, but my area is educational technology, and I've worked on several projects the last 4 years, I guess, trying to get some more innovation in teaching and learning practices at school. The biggest project, the most successful one, is called Schooltas, which is an e-book platform and which has been adopted by several other publishers after we introduced it. I'll show you a video of that soon. Basically, that's an app to connect the old books with the possibilities of online learning. Then I've another project which I'll show you something about. It's augmented reality in terms of relating that to the also old school books. So basically what I'm trying to do is to connect that old educational world with the new. And I've also done some projects with Google Maps and the museum. If you want to know more about that, you can contact me. My contact details are here. Today I'm going to talk a little bit more about the general setting of educational technology and how technology will change the field of education according to my experience of the last couple of years. First of all, I'll show you a little bit about the projects I just showed you, just to get an idea of what I've been up to. The project Schooltas, which means, for those who don't speak Dutch, school bag, basically, is a project in which we saw tablet education become very prominent, and we wanted to get onto that, basically by connecting the old books and the structure of those books and connecting them to the new world. I'll show you a little bit of a promo for it. This is not the product itself, but the commercial for it. What we try to do is connect the book to collaborative learning, basically. So this is what it is. I'll show you.
More and more schools have started working with tablets and laptops. A few years from now, it will be difficult to imagine a classroom without these devices. Schooltas ties the familiar books and teaching methods into new possibilities of interactive learning. But learning takes more. You learn together. You learn with your classmates. You learn with your teacher. In class, outside. And learning means creating. Creating.
Oh, sorry. I was a little bit disconnected there for the video, but basically what Schooltas is, it's a way to connect, as I said, the old books via the iPad and tablet educational field to collaborative learning, so people can share and work together in classes and basically put their own content in the context of their learning book and share it in that setting. And it's been a very successful platform for some not super technological reasons. The main one which made it possible was that there was an offline mode, and that made it so much easier for students and teachers to keep on working and not be disrupted in their regular process. Another project which I wanted to show you very shortly before I go to the rest of the presentation is the connection of augmented reality to the school books. I'll start a video again, and what we tried to do here was try to make the book more lively. So for students who find it difficult to read or find it difficult to understand texts just by reading a book, we tried to make it more lively for them to still understand the subject that they were taught. What we did here, the example is a geography book in which we try to explain the different layers of a mountain, basically. The climates change if you go higher up the mountain. That's being told in a book by text, and what we tried to do was make that more interactive for students. I'll show you how that works. We did this in collaboration with a company called Average. I'll show you what it is. Here you see it being used in the classroom. So we went to test it out with various classrooms using our books and see what that's me over there watching with some students how they use it. So basically that's the augmented reality project that we did, and we are now currently looking into how we can make that more scalable for more applications, or no, I should say differently. More ways in which we can combine augmented reality with school books, and that's still an exploratory phase, but it's really fun to do. And by the way, these kids go crazy when you let them use their mobile phones. So those are just two examples of what I did, but what I wanted to talk about now is not what I did, but what I see happening in the educational technology world in general. To do that, it always makes sense to start looking at investments, because that shows you a little bit about how the world is moving. And if you look at the global financial investments in educational technology, that sector specifically, you see that in 2016 there's been quite an explosion of, or not an explosion, but at least quite a steep rise in investment. At that time, I've been working for 4 years in this sector, so I've experienced that. There was a lot of hype about personalized education, that every student could get content specifically tailored to them. And there were a lot of initiatives that were trying to do that. There are also other initiatives around educational technology. It's very diverse. There's a lot happening. A lot of people want to innovate in education. And, well, I think it's because we all had school or had an experience of being at school and thought we could do better, which is great. But there's something going on which I feel like most people forget. Because if you look at this peak in investment, you see that what is being promised to schools actually doesn't deliver or doesn't add value to the actual learning process. And I have some examples of that. First of all, the reason why that happens is because people often focus on technology and try to make deals with managers and IT departments in schools, but they don't really actually talk to teachers or go inside the classroom to see how do you actually learn or how do you teach and how can technology add to that. Basically, they start from a different point, start saying, well, we have nice technology and we think somehow that you could use this, but they actually never test it. And what happens is a lot of these initiatives, they fall flat in the end because they haven't done the proper user research. I'll show you some examples of why this is a bad way of going about technology in education, because for example, there's now this whole trend and hype around virtual reality in classrooms. And one of the arguments that is being given is, well, you create more empathy in your students because they are able to see the world through another one's eyes. And that makes sense from a theoretical perspective, but if you look at this setting, these students they're not engaged with each other, they're very isolated. So this is actually the opposite of being social or being more empathetic to your peer. This is being closed off and individualized. Another one is personalized education. I already talked about it. The idea was that every student could get content and could get teaching tailored to their individual needs. But if you look at these two pictures, just two random classrooms, the devices have been shoved into this classroom, but basically the setting is still collective. It's not individual at all. It's just you change the book for the laptop, but you still listen to one person and you all get the same input basically. Or if not, then probably you're watching a YouTube video in the back of the classroom, which is fine, which is great, but doesn't really change much about education itself. The way we teach and the way we learn is still the same. So then ultimately the question is, does this add value to teaching and to education? Here's another example of technology that's being shoved into schools, LMS, learning management systems. If I talk to teachers a lot, and they absolutely hate their LMS. Actually, they don't see any value in it, and they want to, if they could, they wanted to avoid it. And this is really a trend. It's not really designed to be intuitive or something you want to use. Most people are frustrated with it. So what I'm trying to say is that often there's not really a product market fit for technology in education. People think that they know the solution and try to shove something into a school, but they haven't really listened to the educators. And ultimately that is not a good trend, because in the long term you'll not really amount to any real change. There's one example I wanted to give you, a tech startup of which I know the founders. It's called Lesson Up. It's a Dutch startup initiative. They do something which is the opposite. They really listen to teachers and what they want. And what they came with was basically an online sort of collaborative platform for teachers, and they share their presentations with each other. So what you get is sort of a PowerPoint, but only in a sort of a user-generated content platform. So that doesn't really change a lot about how we teach or how we learn, but it does. It is popular among teachers. So what are the summary of this? What I just said is that basically there's been a global investment in Edtech, and that peaked in 2016. And you see that a lot of those initiatives fall short because technology is given priority over education. And that is not a good thing because you don't have a good product market fit. So this is the general scene of education technology. I do think that technology is going to change education, but it's going to be different. And you need to look at it from a more of a meta standpoint and not look at one solution or one technology specifically. Basically, I don't know if you've heard of this guy. His name is Marshall McLuhan. He's a cultural philosopher from the 60s, and my background is in cultural studies as well. And he wrote a book in which he, for instance, introduced the term global village in 1959. So before internet was even created or people were using it, he was already seeing interconnectedness between people. But the main message for which he's known, the main sort of quote which people use is not this one, but it does relate to this one, but it's called "The medium is the message." And what he's trying to say is people often tend to focus on content or solutions or specific technology, but they don't look at how people change because of the introduction of technology. And so it's not the tool itself that you should focus on, it's basically how do people change because of the changing tools. And this is sort of the focus I'm going to have for the rest of this presentation, because what you see is, yes, sure, technology is booming. Everybody is telling us we need to do something with AI, with VR, with AR, with Internet of Things, you name it. There are a lot of hypes in technology and a lot of things we need to do, or supposedly need to do. But that's going a little bit too fast. Basically, what you would want to know is how does that rise of technology change the way people act and react and act among each other. So basically the social process, that's what I wanted to look at. And so how that applies to education and technology, I think I have an idea about that. So let me start with saying what I just said. A lot of people come to us and say, you have to do something with technology, you have to do something with technology. And they stop there, they have to do something with innovation. And they don't really try to tell us why. One of the things which I hear a lot, and I think you guys at Society are probably very aware of, is the Moore's Law, in which people are saying that the rise of AI will surpass human intelligence, or even the collective human intelligence of all of us. And this is something I find fascinating, but if this is true, and I do believe that it's true, then that means that human learning will also be affected simply by the fact that all computers are being more intelligent and AI will take over a lot of tasks. So here's what a regular educator would say. They would say, well, my students, young students, learn their schoolwork because they are repeating exercises, they're training their brains. You have to learn your ABC by repeating ABC. You have to learn 1 + 1 is 2 by repeating 1 + 1 is 2, and that get more complicated and more complicated in that exercise. Basically, you need to repeat. You need to train your brain to be able to learn. But the interesting thing is that a lot of futurists or technologists would say that all repetitive tasks will be taken over by artificial intelligence. Now, if I take those two statements, there's something very sort of eerie and weird about that, and this is where the medium is the message comes in. If you take those two statements, you would actually say, so students learn by repetition, repetitive tasks will be taken over by AI. So students no longer need to learn. That's a sort of a logical follow-up on those two statements. And this seems not the way we want to go, or this doesn't seem like the message that we want or should want for our world. Right, so how does this work? How would you interpret this? Basically, both of these two are wrong. The educators that say that you only learn by repeating tasks, they're only telling you part of the story. And the technologists that tell you that all repetitive tasks will be taken over, they are also only telling you part of the story. It's a little bit more nuanced, and to understand that, maybe you should look a little bit into human learning. Before we started, we did a practice last week on this presentation, and someone told me that I needed to be careful with the term geeks, and I wanted to clarify here that I did not create this image. I took it from internet, and I saw a meme about someone who is trying to convince us that programming and running scripts is more effective and more efficient. This is the meme that I saw, and I think it applies to the message of today. Basically, what this is saying is that someone who is into programming, let's say a geek, He does some manual work and gets annoyed and tries to automate it because he doesn't want to do the manual work anymore. And then he runs a script and he wins ultimately. And in this period, he gets laughed at by other people who are still doing the manual work. But in the end of the day, they lose. This sounds like a very nice way to convince yourself that programming is the way to go, and I actually do believe in this, but it's a little bit more nuanced. I saw this nice quote from Mandela. He said, "You don't lose, you win, or you learn." And this is where it applies to education and becomes relevant, because let's put this logic into that slide again. And what you would see is not losing or winning, but you would see someone who's still learning and someone who stops learning. Okay, so keep this in mind, because it also shows you that this isn't the way you want to be handling life or learning or lifelong learning. You would have to think about how do people actually learn. So there's this Dutch theory about how people learn, and basically it's, I'll translate this slide a little bit. You have to reproduce knowledge, basically repeat the thing that you are being taught. That's what the educator said in the first slide. But that's not all. That's not all that is a part of learning. There's also the part of gaining insight into what you have reproduced. So what have you actually repeated? Do you understand what you have repeated? And then once you understand what you've repeated, you are able to transfer that insight into a different context. And two different contexts would be great. So that's the next part. Then you can use it in a context that is familiar, one discipline, and then you can use it in a totally different context. There's an international educational model, which a lot of people also know. It's called Bloom's Taxonomy of learning, and he basically says the same thing. There are different cognitive levels. He calls them higher levels of cognition and lower levels of cognition. So first you start with remembering, so repeating, and then you start with understanding. This is the same as the previous model. Then you start with applying. It's also still the same. But then there are higher levels of cognition, and they are about analyzing, evaluating, and creating, and basically really mastering the subject or the discipline. Now, if you go back to that geek chart that I showed earlier, you'll see that what actually should happen for every learner, and it doesn't matter how fast or how slow they are, is that they do some repetitive work, all of them. Then they try to understand what they're doing, analyze it, write a script, as you would say, apply that script, and then you get a new learning curve in which you see a new situation in which you could analyze and understand again, and apply it again, and so on and so forth. So basically, it doesn't end once you write one script or once you apply your knowledge only once. You have to try to do that in different contexts, and then ultimately be a creator. And that's actually what learning for humans is about. So if you look at this guy, he's only partially right. Sure, a lot of sort of knowledge can be looked up online, but you still have to remember that as a human. You still have to understand what it means and put it into context. So what I would say is that the emphasis of education, basically, it changes. It's not about remembering. It's not about testing. It's about applying your knowledge in different situations. That's where the emphasis of education will change. So again, we're not looking into end products or technological VR headsets into the classroom. We're talking about the way we teach, the way we learn, and the emphasis we need to change. Here's an interesting chart that I found. It's about the likelihood of jobs that will be automated by AI. And if you look at this chart, you'll see the amount of students. That's the gray chart, and the likelihood of it being automated, and it being a sector. So basically, at the top of this, you'll see commercial, financial, and administrative jobs. A lot of students are enrolled there, but there's also a high likelihood that their jobs will be automated in the future. Now, if you look at education, you'll see that people who are in education are in a sector that is very unlikely to be automated, and that's because of the things that I just said. It's not about automation alone, it's about understanding and applying your knowledge into different contexts. So to sum up, what I would say, if you look at the medium is the message, so how should we interpret this rise of technology? You shouldn't think that you should push technology into the classroom just because it's there, but you should be very aware of the fact that technology is outside of the classroom and it's going to change the way we live and interact with each other, with our devices, etc. And so it should primarily be a change in teaching and learning and not in products. We need to give students different skills, and I mean teachers in the educational system. So okay, that's all very well and nicely put, but what does it actually mean? What should change in education? If you look at what I just said about the higher levels of cognition. Well, first of all, a lot of schools around the world are centered around standardized tests, right? So you go to school, you're prepared for some sort of test which has a definite outcome, and you need to comply to that definite outcome to pass the test. That doesn't make sense anymore, because that's just reproduction of knowledge, and it's a very specific set of knowledge. It doesn't really challenge a student to understand what he's learned or she has learned, and let alone apply it in a different situation than that specific testing scenario. So basically what I'm saying is get rid of standardized tests in education and try to use tests just to see where the student is still lacking knowledge, not to assess him or write him off in any way. There's basically what an assessment or a test should do, should show you the things that you still need to learn and not the things that you don't know yet. Because if you don't know them yet, that means that you have to learn them. So that's the insight that you should have before you begin learning and not after. This is another one which should change in education is a lot of schools and school systems are divided into disciplines. So you have math, and you have physics, and you have arts, you have language. But those are only sort of isolated bits in a school, and they never try to challenge students to apply their English, for example, in a math class or the other way around. And in life, you don't only do one discipline. You have to be able to, for example, as we are conversing now, I need to use my English, but I also need to use my knowledge of cultural studies, the other things that I learned, and I try to assemble that into one presentation, so I should not think into one discipline. And there are multiple examples of this in school that we don't do now, and that starts with the standardized test. So this is the discipline, this is what you should know. That's a wrong approach. Basically, you should say this is the problem, try to find the disciplines that you need to solve that problem, and that's what we should try to teach our students. Another thing, I think this is something very underused in schools, and that's the fact that we are able to collaborate across the world. And in business, everybody is doing that. Everybody is using Skype, Slack, different communications to be able to solve problems together. And in education, it's still very isolated. There's still one building, and people interact within that one building. And that's a shame, because it doesn't show you how large the world is and how much you can learn from the rest of the world and how people differ in different parts of the world. The screenshot that I showed you here is a project which I'm very yeah, I'm kind of in love with this. What it is it's a principle based on trying to get teenagers across the world connected to each other to try to learn. So basically they have some sort of project that they need to do, and they will send out a letter, and they will send that to someone in, for example, Ghana or Australia or South Korea. They will get peer feedback from a student in that country, and they will know what they need to improve on. And the funny thing is, if you peer feedback is sort of the best kind of feedback that you can have. It's been demonstrated in research that 90% of students are more willing to change their or are learning more from peer feedback than they are from teacher feedback. And that makes sense, sort of. I mean, I can imagine myself also listening more to peers than to authoritarian people. So this project sort of, it does a couple of things, because it's also about the multidisciplinary approach, which I said, it's about learning how to use English, for example, because that's the language in which people are trying to connect to each other, and thinking about something like sustainability and having to see your own solution in a different context, namely a context across the globe. So this is really challenging people to apply their knowledge in different contexts. So that's why I think this is a great initiative, and it's also something which is becoming more and more important in this rising world of technology. Another thing, this one is quite important. Teachers, as I said, they're used to teaching their own discipline, so they're used to transferring fixed knowledge, facts, basically things that you can Google. And often they forget that the most important role is that they need to facilitate students to become learners. And so they should be more of a coach and see where they can help students where they are getting stuck. And the image that I showed you here is an example of a teacher in the UK who had an amazing story, which I wanted to share. Basically what he did is he started school. And in that school he doesn't have any books, he doesn't have any furniture, he doesn't have anything. He gives his students almost nothing except a curriculum that he has written himself. And the way he writes the curriculum is he starts out at the beginning of the school year with something that he knows that all students, or at least the level of the students, is able to deal with. And he bases his curriculum design on something which he calls the rags to riches narrative. What that means is, in the early part of the school year, then let's say this part, we make sure that everybody is developing and getting more and more challenged throughout, but not challenged in a way that they cannot handle it. But he deliberately, in this sort of second act, and this is where this sort of Act 1, Act 2, Act 3 of the story, that's how he frames it. In the second act, he deliberately gives his students challenges which are way over their head and complicated. And why does he do that? He does that because he wants them to crash. He actually wants them to hit a wall. That's something that they can't solve, something that they are basically puzzled by, or what have you. An assignment which is too difficult for them to handle. And he has a system to be able to do this, which is quite fascinating. And why does he do that? Because at the end of the day, in the third act, he can then show them what has gone wrong and where they were overexerting themselves, and show them the way in which they should be able to understand their own capacity and understand their own capability. And don't overreach, basically, but do the things that you need to do to progress. And I fell in love with this method, because I do think that at the end of the school year, students are being taught about life, basically, about how you have to pick yourself up and go ahead and learn from your mistakes and your failures. So that's something that all teachers, I think, should build into their own curriculum, is that they listen to students and try to facilitate in their learning path, basically. And another thing which something that you see happening is within primary school and high school is that the students are being taught about creativity and logical thinking, and the reason is we need to understand how computers are being programmed or how they are and how they think. Let's say how machine learning works, for example, but also basically how you just program. Obviously, for kids, you don't have to teach them about JavaScript or PHP or any given programming language, because those are all out of date when they start having a job. So that's a challenge. But what they do need to understand is logical thinking and computational thinking. And there are some initiatives which I find very interesting, and that's, for example, Lego. Lego has an educational branch, and what they do is they show the kids how they can make a little Lego robot and make it do what they say it has to do. And it's connected to an app as well. And it's less dependent on curriculum and more on logical thinking and computational thinking. And that's a good thing. And there's even for the lower kids or the lower class in primary school, there's something called Scratch, which is it's the same sort of principle in which you learn how to in sort of basic steps that a kid can understand on a computer, on a laptop, make something happen. So try to use logical, like if this then that, and things like that. And these sort of educational initiatives are great. I think the main thing is that governments should demand schools to give this to their students, and that's not something that's happening now. It's still it's not mandatory, and that's a shame, because it should be, in my opinion, because that's where students should be prepared for this kind of thinking, or at least understanding. So all of these things, they don't really, it's not super new what I'm saying here. It's a lot of people have said this. So the things about computational thinking, multidisciplinary thinking, applying your skills, having teachers as coaches, they all amount to something called school, because school, initially, the etymology of school means free time. It's cultivating your mind. And it doesn't mean standardized testing, and it doesn't mean repeating or using repetitive tasks to sort of become bored at school. That's not what school is for. School is supposed to sort of cultivate your mind. And literally, it means free time. So we should see school more as free time than as work. And that's, I think that's the main thing that people should be aware of, and should sort of change their mindset about what education is. Again, I come back to this chart. A lot of teachers know the things that I already said. It's not something that I sort of came up with by myself. It's because I've talked to a lot of teachers, and they tell me that these are the things that they are more concerned with, more than technology, at least. So what I would urge everyone who is in technology and who wants to do something into education is to skip the management layer, please, and go to the teachers, and try to help them in these initiatives that you see. It's great to see students being prepared for the future and for future-ready skills, as they say, but we have control about that simply by just going to the schools, talking to the teachers, talking to the students, and trying to help them to learn to apply their skills. So this is actually my message, my sort of take-home message to everyone at Society who's working in technology. I mean, if you want to do something with education or for education, try to help them first. Don't go to education because you think you can make a lot of money. I'll tell you that right now. That's not the right reason to go there. But if you want to have an impact in education, you should talk to educators. Talk to what is it that they need to improve their schools, their education, and their students ultimately, to have them be able to be prepared for this new future in which technology is going to disrupt a lot of sectors. So let's prepare those students for that. That's my message. Any questions?
Any questions, attendees? Please use the chat in the Q&A sections. So I personally have a question, Director.
Yeah, sure.
Which is like, so do you emphasize more on a personalized learning for each of the individuals or the students, or it should be done based on their level of thinking, like in a group? Or,
Yeah, I do think that's personalized education is a vague term, basically. A lot of people think that you can do that fully automatically. Sure, it has to do with the level of the student, but it's also about how they are acting socially, how they are feeling. I mean, it's about personal development, really, and that's a teacher's job also to see how, if someone is, for example, I don't know, has a bad home situation, then maybe you shouldn't try to solve that with some cognitive exercises. You know what I mean? Basically, the whole personalized education is great, but if you would want to do that, you would first of all, for most educational systems, and now I'm talking about the Dutch system, you would need more teachers, basically. And that's not something people want to hear. They think that's possible by automating, but that's only part of what a teacher does. And so yes, technology can help there, but I think that most of all you need more teachers if you want to really have a personal education and sort of personal tutoring, because it's impossible for someone to have 800 students and give them personal attention. But you need personal attention from another human being, basically.
Right. So there are a few of the sectors or few of the areas which cannot be automated or which requires the human presence, especially in the education industry, because not everything can be automated as well.
No, there are things that I think should and could be automated. Really, I don't think it's necessary for everyone to do the same exercises to exercise their sort of their level. And that's something that a system can see, can respond to, and they can give you more challenging questions for the cognitive part. And I do think that is important, because ultimately, if you're not being challenged, you also get demotivated. So, yeah, I do think that there's an important area, and this is what they call adaptive learning or personalized learning. But again, try to remember also your own high school. I mean, making exercises was only part of your sort of total school experience. It's also about reflecting on your work and collaborating with your peers. And those are the parts, the social parts, and that's also why it's not high on the list of likely to be automated. I mean, education as a sector, because there's a lot of social involvement there, right? Yeah, so I do think that there is something to be automated, and probably that's like 10 to 20% of what education is.
Yeah, Mirza, you can use the chat and the Q&A sections to ask the queries, because this is an audio broadcast, so participant cannot speak, but they can definitely ask queries to the Q&A or the chat sections. Okay, so
is there a question?
Mirza is trying to ask a query.
Yeah.
He will just be asking.
Sure. Hi, Casper. Shoot.
So we have the query from Casper.
Yeah. I could see it. So what is the view? What is my view of comparing all education with learning a language? I'm not sure if I totally understand the question. Is it? Yeah. Yeah. So I think. Yeah, there's some combo. I think that's interesting. So I'm sorry, I'm reading aloud what I see in the chat box. I'll explain. So what you see happening with this new natural language interfacing of technology is that a lot of things can be and probably will be translated by machines, right? Still with errors, but that will sort of filter itself out. What I think would be interesting in this case is a kid needs to learn a language anyway. It's not a natural thing. I mean, if you put a kid in the jungle and put him there for 18 years, take him out, he won't know how to speak or learn a language. So he'll still need to be able to learn that. What I think would be interesting is to let a machine do some translating and Casper, let me finish what I was saying. So let the machine do some translating and let the student respond to the outcome of that, in the sense that, is it correct? Is there something that needs to be different? Do you just simply take what the machine is telling you, or do you have to apply, again, it's about application, apply what you have learned about grammar and vocabulary to what the machine is telling you? And that's about critical thinking as well. So being able to challenge what someone else says is the right translation. That will be a nice combo of sort of using machine intelligence for translation, but also using the critical thinking skills of a human to evaluate that machine translation. And the second question, which I see coming in, there seems to be an analogy to learning disciplines, only such as math and science, or trying to combine all these to solve problems.
Right. Can I speak now?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So here's my question. Right. So you had a lot of examples, whether they're supported by technology or not. Right. Around, standardized testing good, and how do we teach, or what is the right way for people to learn? Is it through experience, or is it through rote kind of thing, right? And we perhaps split too much the disciplines and try to teach people math only versus science rules only, and then without trying to apply those to real-world principles or real-world problems. And so when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about, perhaps learning a language, right? Because there's so much knowledge about how languages are effectively taught, and so many ways to do it wrong. Where, if I'm looking, for example, at U.S. schools where they learn languages and are able to emerge after years of learning a language with hardly any language skills, versus, my experience of being taught languages in the Netherlands, where you were expected to, basically speak that language pretty well after a bunch of years in high school. But it is some sort of combination. Rote is required, but also practice and repetition. And so you could perhaps, apply that same level of thinking to how you would put a curriculum together, right? You do need to learn the vocab, but you also need to practice with it, and you need to repeat it.
Yeah,
And
that's an interesting, Casper. I assume that you're Dutch. I'm not sure, but
yes.
That's an interesting thing about the curriculum and testing about languages. I was at a school a couple of weeks ago, and teachers told me, yeah, so in the first couple of years of high school, we still actively do oral skills, so we still practice speaking, and we still practice listening. But in the later years of high school, we actually don't put much emphasis on it. And you know why? Because it's not going to be in the end exam of high school. And so this blows my mind, because that is not how you actually learn a language, just by doing reading exercises. And simply because the end exam focuses on reading for the large part, that doesn't mean that you should adjust your education to that standardized test. It's what you said. You need to be able to apply by actually communicating to other people in that same language. So I would say, if people go to the higher levels of high school, throw them into the countries of the language that they're trying to learn. I mean, I've had it myself, that I was being not forced, but I was 14, and I had to help some people move in Spain, but they didn't speak any word of English or any sort of language that I knew of. So I was forced into applying my minimal set of Spanish into real world communication, and that taught me so much more than just the rote exercises. So you need the combination. I think that in the end, in the future, students will have to be, forced is not the right word, but be more challenged by actually applying those other skills in practice. And that's where they probably have more benefit from it, also for the future careers, basically. You have to collaborate globally, you have to be able to communicate. That's what language is. I don't know if that's exactly a question.
Yeah, no. So Mike, I'm just like thinking out loud here a little bit, but my thinking was that there's always going to be some level of rote work that is going to be required, right?
Exactly.
So if you take math, for example, you have to simply know the rules, and you have to do the exercises.
Exactly.
That's like learning vocab.
Yep.
And if you don't do it, you can't communicate to solve these problems. Now, it strikes me that when we talk about education or using technology in education, that we focus a lot on sort of how do you combine, how do you create interesting real-world problems for students to solve, in which they can collaborate and so forth. How do we bring it all together, which is great. And it seems like, technology can help create interesting scenarios and all of that. But we can perhaps also apply technology to help just with the more mundane pieces of the road and the discipline.
I agree. Look, very simply put, if you have textbooks and you have exercise books, right? Just simply put in what you do. That's for the rote work, the exercises, basically.
Yeah.
And that can be digitalized. I do believe that, and there are a lot of platforms out there that do that, and also from our company, by the way, we produce that ourselves. The challenge, and this is the beginning of my presentation, is that a lot of schools are simply not ready to let their students work fully digitally. And it's as mundane as not having the right Wi-Fi network in place. It's really, you would be amazed what are the bottlenecks of trying to implement those sort of, it would seem more efficient to let students work digitally on their exercises for the rote work, as you said. and that there's an interesting challenge that the infrastructure is simply not there yet, or teachers are not. They find it very difficult to handle those devices in their classroom, because what if they are going to YouTube, or what if, stuff like that. The teachers are very much wanting to be in control of what their students are doing. It's my experience. I'm not judging, but that's basically what they are trying to do, and that holds back a lot of these sort of digitalization efforts, really. To let the students, or to trust them that they are doing their work. And this is not a new problem, because I used to be in school and draw while we were actually having to do exercise. Yeah, that's just a part of what the school experiences is, and that's something that teachers need to accept as well. But let me put it this way: if we are able to overcome that hurdle, let's say, of the simple basic infrastructure at schools being digital first, then yes, I think the road work can definitely be done digitally. Because students, we don't have to teach students how to work digitally. They already know how. That's not something, that's also a misconception, that the students are not aware of what they're doing. I don't believe that at all. I think we just don't offer them the right facilities to be able to do those exercises digitally, and that's often where the falter. Yeah. But I agree, Casper. To sum up, I agree that that is a part of education that we can make more efficient. Is probably what I would say. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Edtech, for that. And we have one query from Mirza, who says, I mentor kids to identify world's problem and innovate solutions to those. My question is, how do we use technology to make kids more innovative?
Right. That's a good question. Excellent, actually, because so what I would suggest is that, again, if you look at those higher levels of cognition, and my main theory is that we should focus on that more. And at the top of that sort of pyramid is the creation. So basically, being able to create things yourself. If we can enable students to create their own sort of projects, be it digitally. I mean, Lego for Education is a great example as well. Give them sort of tools to demonstrate their knowledge or apply their knowledge in sort of themselves. I think that's the best way to go. So if you look at, for example, VR, AR, stuff like that, right? Don't offer them prepackaged sort of theories, which we did, to be honest, in the example that I gave, but offer them the tools to create their own AR experience. You know what I'm saying? So use that and make it also super easy for students to understand, but offer them sort of tools to create digital amazing things. So let them create, for example, I could imagine that you would put the question out there like, go into your city center and tell me where you can find remnants of the Roman Empire, and build some AR objects on the locations in the city where you can find that. And if you would offer such a tool, and this is just, this is off the top of my head, it's not really something that that maybe applies, but what it does, it asks those students to create something and learn along the way, instead of creating everything in advance and telling them that they have to learn that. So I think that's the main thing that you need to, if you want to do something innovative, try to trust the students that they are creative themselves and don't try to be the creator. And I think that's the sort of the message there.
We have one last question from Eric, who says, what about having machines evaluating students' essay or other exercises, and look for areas where improvement are needed, categorizing mistakes and pointing to relevant new sources to better learn the subject matter that is below standard?
Could you repeat the question? Sorry, I didn't fully understand what you're saying.
Sure. Eric says, what about having machines evaluating students' essay or other exercises and look for areas for where improvements are needed, categorizing mistakes and pointing to relevant news source?
Yeah, that's I think that would help if you would ask teachers basically if you would ask teachers what is your main problem, where can we help you the most, they would say I don't have time. Basically, they are overburdened with work. That's the main thing. So if we can help them sort of make life easier for them to do their work, that would be great. So if you would offer them sort of hints into where they have to look into a specific student, what is going on, then that would be great. But again, before you go into that, you need to understand the school and the school structure. And a lot of schools simply don't have the facilities to work digitally. So you can only show a teacher where they have to intervene or where the essay was wrong if the students are working digitally. And that's sort of a basic bottleneck that you need to be aware of. That you need to, first of all, make it super easy for those students to hand in their essay, and then make it super easy for teachers to understand what the machine is telling them to focus on. And in that part, I do think that AI can really, really make a difference by highlighting all the things that sort of you know are grammatically incorrect, for example. And then you would already help a teacher with that, but you still need personal feedback to the student from the teacher. You can never, that's where it often goes wrong, you can never underestimate that part of learning. It's only to help the teacher in that case. Is that an answer to your question?
Yes. Eric said yes.
All right. Great.
Yes. So I guess that's it for now. So thanks all for joining us in today's webinar and for your time. And thanks a lot, Dieter, for taking us through this insightful session on how we could use the message medium in a good, proactive manner and help the society as well.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me for this. I always find it interesting to hear from other people as well.
Thanks a lot, Dieter. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you too. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.